Elias Boone saw the horse before he heard the chain, a black bulk pinned to a cottonwood at the edge of his north pasture. Iron links bit into the trunk where someone had wrapped them twice and locked them mean. The animal's right ear was torn like a flag after a storm. Elias swung down, palms open, voice low. "Easy, big fella. Nobody's here to hurt you." The horse rolled a white rim of eye and stamped once. The chain sang. Around his thick neck sat a rawhide collar, and tied to it with rough twine hung a folded scrap, stained with dust and something darker. Elias let his mare breathe, so the big one could smell horse and not hunter, then slid 2 fingers to the twine. He saw the scrawl before he touched it, letters crooked and pressed too hard, a child's brave hand. He loosened the knot, slow. The first line showed itself plain. "Please find my sis." The rest blurred where sweat or tears had run through the ink. Beneath it, a second line caught the light. "He knows the way." Elias looked again at the collar and noticed a length of plaited hair tucked under it. Short and fine, ribboned in faded blue, a braid small enough to belong to a girl. He cupped the note because the wind wanted it. A gate clanged behind him, and voices carried. "Boone," someone called. Elias didn't turn. The big horse's breath warmed his sleeve. "He's not mine," he said. "Not anybody's, from the look of him." The chain jerked when the animal tested it. The lock held. Men came up as dust and talk first, then hats, then Silas Crane's smile. "Well, I'll be," Silas said, stepping near. "That's the brute tore up a corral side last night. Sheriff says he's to be sold for damages." Elias slid the scrap into his vest. "Somebody left a message," he said. "Someone running." Silas flicked a glance at the collar. "Message, is it? Then it belongs with the rest of the property." He put a boot on the chain and leaned, testing it like a trap. The horse flattened his ears and didn't move. "Sheriff wants him sold," Silas said louder. "I'll take him up to town." Elias stepped between the men and the animal. "He's tied on my land," he answered. "He doesn't leave till I say." The horse bumped his shoulder into Elias's back, not to shove, just to let him know he was there. "He knows the way," the note had said. Way to what? A sister? A camp? A grave? Elias glanced at the blue ribbon and felt a familiar ache open. "If there's a child in this," he said, louder than breath, "I'll find her." Silas laughed and spat. "You'll find nothing but trouble." He jerked his chin at the chain. "Key's in town. We'll fetch it." "You do that," Elias said, though he had already measured the links and knew what a cold chisel could do by sundown. The men turned away, talking price. Elias set his palm against the horse's cheek and felt the heat there like a late prayer. "All right then now," he said to the dark head. "Show me, if you can." The animal didn't step, but the blade of his face pointed more toward the trees beyond the fence. The braid under his collar shivered against the rawhide, as if it remembered the hands that tied it, and the scrap in Elias's vest seemed to grow heavier, a small weight with the pull of a life he had yet to find. By sundown, the pasture fence bristled with bodies, word having spread that Elias Boone was sheltering a monster chained to his own cottonwood, and every man who wanted a laugh or a chance at cheap horseflesh had come to gawk. Silas Crane returned with a half-dozen of his ranch hands, all spurs and spit, each eager to prove they weren't afraid of a stallion too big for sense. "Look at the brute," one sneered. "Bigger than a wagon team, hide like iron, worth a pretty penny if he doesn't crush you first." Elias stood with a chisel and mallet in hand, working slow at the lock. He kept his body between the gawkers and the horse, for though Thunder, he'd named him in his mind already, hadn't made a move to bite or strike since morning, the men's jeers were stirring his muscles to quiver. "Step aside, Boone," Silas barked. Sheriff's writ says he's town property. I'll take him in now, fetch the money later. Elias didn't glance back. He drove the mallet again, sparks flying from the chain, and a gasp ran through the crowd. "Boone's stealing a horse!" a voice cried, half in glee. "More fool than I thought," another said. Elias turned then, lifting the scrap of paper from his vest, waving it so the lantern strung along the fence caught its edges. "Some child left this," he said, voice cutting through the buzz. "Said this horse knows the way. If there's a girl lost out there, chained to hunger or worse, I'll not waste time watching you bid over a beast while she starves." A hush fell, broken by Silas's laughter, sharp as broken glass. "A child's scribble? And you'll stake your name on that? You'll follow a horse into the brush and claim you're hunting saints?" The men chuckled, but Elias saw a few eyes dart to the braid of blue ribbon under the collar, the faint stain on the note. He struck the chisel again, harder, and the lock bit deep. Thunder blew a gust from his nostrils that silenced the fence line, like smoke from a furnace. "If he runs me to ground, so be it," Elias said, "but I won't stand by while someone small begged for help in ink they could barely shape." Silas shoved forward, hand to the mallet. "You loose him, Boone, and you'll answer for the damage." Elias caught his wrist, their boots grinding dirt. The chain groaned, split. One link sheared and fell. The horse reared half a height, then stilled, as if waiting for command. Elias dropped Silas's arm and pulled the last of the iron free. Thunder stood like judgment, head turning toward the line of trees as though the path had been there all along. "See there?" Elias said, breath ragged. "He knows where to go." Some men shuffled back, suddenly uneasy, as though the black giant had grown even larger without chains. "You'll follow him and die in the dark," Silas warned. Elias swung into his saddle and slipped the scrap back to his breast. "Maybe," he said, "or maybe I'll bring back the only thing that matters." The horse surged toward the woods, dragging the last coil of chain, and Elias's mare leapt to follow. Behind him, Silas shouted, "You'll lose everything," but the words dwindled under the pounding hooves. Elias only tightened his grip and prayed the child who wrote that note still breathed somewhere ahead. The forest swallowed the light as soon as Elias crossed the tree line, Thunder's black bulk moving ahead with a certainty that turned the night from enemy to guide, the broken chain clattering against stones like a bell tolling for someone unseen. His own mare kept pace uneasily, ears flicking at owls and the snap of underbrush, but the stallion pressed on, weaving a line through cottonwoods and mesquite, as if following a scent too faint for human sense. Elias leaned low, one hand tight on reins, the other brushing the scrap of paper in his vest. Its childish scrawl burned hotter than his lantern flame. He thought of a girl crouched somewhere cold, whispering to her little brother that help would come, praying her desperate words would reach a man she'd never met. Behind him, the shouts of Silas's men had died to silence. Though he knew they'd not give up easy, a chained horse meant profit, and men like Silas chased coin harder than kin. A whippoorwill cried 3 times, then went still, and in that silence, Thunder halted at a shallow creek, dipping his head to drink. Elias dismounted, crouching by the prints in the mud, 2 small bare feet, one dragging at the heel as if too weak to lift, and beside them the fading scuff of a blanket's edge. His chest tightened. "You did know the way," he whispered, rubbing the horse's neck. Thunder jerked his head east, snorting, and Elias followed his gaze into a stand of cedar so dark it looked like a wall. He heard it then, faint as the brush of dry leaves, a cough, small, rasping, carried by the water's hush. Elias froze, listening hard. Again it came, followed by a girl's hushed murmur, words too soft to catch. the sound of a child soothing another. He lit his lantern shielded, turning the flame low, and eased forward. Thunder kept just behind, chain dragging softly, like he knew stealth was needed. Every twig Elias stepped on seemed to crack like gunfire in his ears, but the voices did not stop. Then the brush parted, and he saw them. Two shapes huddled beneath a felled log, a blanket no thicker than burlap wrapped around a boy's small shoulders, his face pale even in lantern shadow. The girl's eyes flashed first, fierce and wide, a braid falling across her cheek with ribbon frayed nearly to threads. She gripped a stick sharpened at the end, holding it like a spear. "Stay back," she croaked, voice shaking but brave. Elias raised his free hand, lantern angled low. "Marin?" he said, the name forming on instinct from the note's half-written plea. Her lips parted, astonishment cracking through her fear, then suspicion hardened her again. "You found the note," she whispered. Elias nodded, throat thick. "I found the horse. He brought me." The boy whimpered, shivering, and Marin pulled him tighter. "Jonah's sick. If you're with them, I'll fight you till I die." Elias knelt slow, placing the lantern on the ground so the light caught the braid under Thunder's collar, the twin to hers. "I'm not with them," he said softly. "I reckon I've been against them most of my life." Thunder stepped close, lowering his head until the girl's fingers brushed the chain on his neck. Her eyes filled with sudden wet light. "He came back," she breathed. "Mama said he would, even after—" She couldn't finish, voice swallowed by the night. Elias took a slow breath, eyes on Jonah's trembling frame. "We've got to move," he said. "Silas's men won't wait long to take you and the horse both. You trust me?" The girl looked from Thunder's steady eye to the chain lying broken in the dirt, then to her brother's weakening breath. She swallowed hard, nodded once. "I'll trust him," she said, touching the horse. "And he trusts you." Elias lifted Jonah into his arms, feeling how light the boy was. Bones sharp through the thin blanket, a heat under his skin that spoke of fever more than summer air. And Marin scrambled beside him, clutching the broken stick as if she could still fight the whole world with it. Thunder moved ahead like a shadow with weight, ears pricked, nose to the wind, the chain clinking against rocks as a warning. Elias hissed low, "Stay close, don't speak," and led them back towards the creek, aiming to cross and lose their trail in the shallows. But before his boots touched water, he heard the crack of laughter. Men's voices too close, carried by lanterns bobbing on the far bank. "Boone's fool enough to follow that beast," Silas called, voice oiled with triumph. "Spread out. He'll come back with nothing but scratches, and we'll be here to claim the prize." Elias crouched, pressing Marin down, shifting Jonah gently so his head rested on his shoulder. The boy stirred, whispering, "Mama," in a thin thread of voice that stabbed through Elias like a nail. Marin bit her lip hard to keep from sobbing, her small hand gripping his sleeve. Thunder stepped into the creek deliberately, splashing enough to cover the child's sound, and Elias blessed the animal's sense. The lantern split, two heading upstream, two down, Silas holding the center. Elias measured the current, then guided Marin to step exactly where he did, stones slick underfoot. Thunder moved last, muscles rippling, chain dragging in water like a drowned snake. They reached the far side, climbing into a clutch of reeds. Elias motioned silence, then shifted Jonah into Marin's lap behind a fallen log. He unslung his rifle, checking the chamber by feel. "He'll smell us," one ranch hand muttered on the opposite shore. "That brute leaves a stench." Silas's laugh cut across. "So does Boone. Reeks of pity. He'll bring us a tail and I'll bring the coin." Thunder's head shot up, ears pinning back, and Elias knew what was coming before it happened. The stallion let loose a scream that split the night, half fury, half warning, and the men cursed, stumbling in the shallows. Elias seized the chance. "Run!" he whispered, shoving Maren forward. She balked. "We'll be seen!" "Better seen moving than caught still," Elias growled, pushing her gently. Thunder reared, hooves smashing a dead branch that cracked like gunfire, buying them the sound to mask their steps. Elias guided Maren and Jonah through the tangle of cedars. Every muscle tuned to the sound of pursuit. Behind them, Silas shouted, "Don't spook him, fool! Hold the line!" A shot cracked, splintering bark above Elias's head. Maren flinched but didn't scream. Jonah whimpered once, muffled in her braid. Elias pulled them into a hollow where roots made a roof and set the children down. He turned back, raising the rifle, sighting through branches at the lantern glow. He could take Silas now, end the chase. But thunder lunged suddenly across the clearing, chain flashing like silver fire, knocking one of the men into the creek with a splash. The horse wheeled, cutting a path straight toward Elias's hollow, then stopped, chest heaving, as though pointing the way. Elias grabbed Maren's hand, scooped Jonah again, and followed. He knew the stallion wasn't just running, he was leading them somewhere deeper. Somewhere even Silas Crane wouldn't dare press. But how far could a sick child and a hunted rancher go before dawn? The stillness of Red Hollow cracked when a heavy rhythm echoed from the far end of the trees. Measured hoofbeats, slow and deliberate, like a drum calling men to judgment. And Elias knew at once they weren't Silas's jittery cowhands, but something heavier, older, bound with intent. He pressed Maren and Jonah deeper into the hollow, finger to lips, then eased forward with his rifle ready, but Thunder didn't shy or rear. The stallion lowered his head as if greeting kin. Out of the dark came a tall rider cloaked in a soldier's greatcoat faded to ash, his beard streaked with iron gray, and across his saddle horn hung a satchel. He dismounted without haste, boots sinking in the loam, and when he raised his hand in greeting, Elias saw fingers twisted with old scars, a man once burned or broken, yet standing unbent. "Boone," the stranger said, voice like gravel softened by rain. Elias's shoulders stiffened. He hadn't heard his name spoken by a stranger in months. "You know me?" The man nodded toward Thunder. "You ride land that was mine once. This horse was mine too, till I chained him." Elias bristled. "Then why leave a child's note on him, begging for help?" The man's eyes flickered, pain deepening the lines around them. "Because the child is mine. Maren is my daughter, Jonah my boy. I chained the stallion not for cruelty, but for lure. Silas would follow the beast, thinking him cursed, and while he did, I prayed some man with conscience would read that note and find my young before Crane's greed did." Elias's breath thinned. The words bent his mind sideways. He turned back toward the hollow where Maren clutched Jonah and stared, wide-eyed. "Papa," she whispered, her voice both joy and ache. The man stepped forward, but stopped short, lifting a hand. "No, girl. Don't come yet. I'm hunted same as you. The sheriff swore me outlaw for debts I never owed, and Crane sharpened that blade, feeding him lies. I couldn't risk bringing you into town." He looked at Elias then, fierce and pleading. "That's why I wrote the note in her hand. I traced the letters with her so any man could see a child begged it, not a wanted man. I needed a soul Crane wouldn't own." Elias's chest pounded. The truth shifted every step he thought he'd taken. "You risked their lives on hope," he said, almost a growl. The father bowed his head. "On hope, or on providence?" Behind them, the sound of men crashing through brush rose again. Silas's pack had regrouped, voices sharp with anger. The outlawed father pushed the satchel into Elias's hands. Proof's in there. Letters, land deeds, Crane's forgery. Enough to damn him if you'll carry it through." Elias stared at the weight now pressing his palms. He'd only meant to free a horse. Now he held the salvation of children and the ruin of a tyrant. Thunder stamped once, hard, as if sealing the pact. Marin's voice trembled from the hollow. "Papa, don't leave us again." The man's face broke, raw with a love he could not claim aloud. He pointed at Elias, firm. "He'll guard you now. Follow the stallion. He'll take you where Crane won't dare ride." Then the father melted back into the trees, a ghost in his own land, leaving Elias with 2 shivering children, a horse that knew the way, and papers that could topple a ranch king. The shouts grew nearer, lanterns flaring. Elias tightened his grip on the satchel and looked at the children, knowing the night had shifted. This was no longer a rescue. It was a war written in a child's hand. Elias shoved the satchel under his arm, pulled Jonah tighter against his chest, and caught Marin's hand in his free one, dragging them both after Thunder as the stallion plunged through brush that slapped their faces and tore at their clothes, the broken chain sparking against stones with each stride like a blacksmith's hammer calling doom. Lanterns bobbed behind them, Silas's men shouting, their curses bouncing off the trunks like hounds baying in the dark, and Elias knew if he stumbled once they'd be swallowed whole. The satchel thumped against his ribs, each strike reminding him of the proof inside, pages that could strip Crane bare if only daylight found them. "Keep low," he hissed at Marin, and she ducked without falter, small legs pumping, braid whipping her back. Jonah groaned, head rolling on Elias's shoulder. Fever burning hotter, and Elias whispered into the boy's hair, "Hold on, son, hold on a little more." Thunder slowed at a ravine, chest heaving, nostrils flaring as he scented the wind. "We can't cross," Elias muttered, but the stallion bunched his muscles and leapt, iron chain clanging like a struck bell, landing sure on the far side. Elias's heart lurched. He couldn't jump a ravine with children in arms. He glanced back, torchlight spreading, Silas's voice slicing through. "Corner him! Boone's got the whelps!" Elias swallowed his fear, set Jonah carefully on Marin's lap, then scrambled down the slope where roots knotted into a crude ladder. "Climb, girl," he ordered. "Take your brother first." Marin's eyes blazed, but she obeyed, hauling Jonah down with the stubbornness of a grown woman in a child's frame. Elias followed, boots slipping. Rifle strapped across his back, satchel pressed to his chest. They scrambled along the ravine bed, water trickling at their feet, while above them shouts split, some men chasing Thunder's silhouette, others searching the gulch. Thunder appeared again, pacing the ridge like a sentinel, tossing his head toward a narrow fissure where cedar boughs grew thick. Elias pushed the children that way, crawling under branches sharp enough to tear skin, the hollow beyond smelling of damp earth and safety. They collapsed into the dark chamber just as a lantern beam swept across the rocks outside, men cursing when they saw nothing but roots. Elias pressed Marin and Jonah close, covering their mouths with calloused hands, heart hammering so loud he swore Silas would hear it. Above, Crane's voice snarled, "Boone's here. I'll stake my land on it. Spread out, boys. He won't leave these woods alive." The men fanned out, the creak of saddle leather and jangle of spurs fading one way, then another. Thunder gave a low rumble, not quite a whinny, not quite a growl, then vanished into shadow, leaving only the soft echo of his hooves. Jonah shivered against Elias, murmuring again for his mother, and Marin whispered fiercely, "Don't you die, Jonah, don't you dare." Elias touched her hair gently. "He won't. Not while I breathe." He felt the satchel dig against his ribs again, the weight of proof and promise, and realized the night had become more than survival. It was a passage. If he could keep them hidden till dawn, if he could carry the children into town with the papers, he could cut Crane's hold to the bone. But for now, with the ravine walls cold around them and enemy voices crawling the woods, Elias had to be stone, silent, and strong, because the moment he faltered, 3 lives and a truth too long buried would be lost in the dark. The first light of dawn crept pale through the cedar needles, turning the hollow into a chamber of gray breath, and Elias knew they couldn't linger. Children weakened faster in damp cold, and Jonah's fever pulsed hotter with every hour, his small chest rattling like dry leaves in a storm. Elias coaxed Maren to her feet, eased Jonah into his arms again, and slipped from the fissure just as thunder appeared on the ridge, ears forward, body rimed with morning mist like smoke rising from a forge. The stallion snorted once, then turned his massive head east, toward the slope that would lead them into a meadow beyond, and Elias followed, every step calculated, rifle balanced, satchel heavy against his side. Maren trudged beside him with her stick still in hand, jaw set against fatigue. They broke through into the open meadow just as the sun spilled across it, and for one fleeting heartbeat Elias thought they'd made it. But then the crack of a whip and the slam of hooves shattered the quiet. From the tree line opposite, Silas Crane rode out astride a bay horse, flanked by 3 of his men, all with rifles glinting in the new light. They had been waiting all night, patient as vultures. "Well now," Silas drawled, reining his mount in so hard it skidded. "Boone brings me a prize better than I hoped. 2 half-dead brats, a stolen stallion, and the proof he thinks will ruin me. Lay it down, Boone, and maybe I'll leave you with breath enough to crawl." Elias shifted Jonah against his shoulder, felt the boy's burning skin, and stepped forward, his boots sinking in dew. "These children aren't yours, Silas. And neither's that horse. You've stolen enough." The ranch boss's smile bared teeth. He nodded at one of his men, who produced a length of rope and swung it like a lasso. "We'll take the brute first. The brats can be sold for labor. Boone can hang himself with the papers he clutches." Thunder pawed the earth, ears pinned, muscles rolling like a storm about to break. Elias bent, setting Jonah carefully in Maren's arms, and whispered, "Run when I tell you." She shook her head fiercely, tears streaking her dirtied cheeks. "Not without you." "Exactly with me," Elias said, rising with rifle leveled. The men laughed, confident in their number. Silas spurred his bay forward, but in that moment thunder lunged, chain whipping like a flail, striking the lassoing cowboy square across the chest and sending him sprawling. Elias fired, the crack tearing the morning still, and another rider reeled, horse screaming. Silas roared, aiming his own rifle, but Elias dropped low, dragging Maren and Jonah with him as the shot seared bark from a cedar behind. Thunder reared, hooves cutting the sky, forcing Silas's mount to shy sideways. The stallion's scream ripped the air, not wild but commanding, and Elias used the chaos to push the children toward the cover of reeds. "Go!" he barked. Maren stumbled, hauling Jonah with desperate strength, and Elias rose again, firing twice more, keeping Silas's men ducking. "You'll die for this," Silas bellowed, voice raw, but his threats were drowned by thunder's pounding charge, the great horse barreling through their line like judgment-given flesh. Elias didn't waste the opening. He sprinted after the children, satchel clutched tight, heart thundering as hard as the hooves around him. They broke into the reeds, safe for a breath, but Elias knew the trap was only sprung, not escaped. Silas wouldn't relent, not with vengeance and coin both hanging in the balance. And as the sun rose full over the meadow, Elias swore he felt the day itself choose sides, waiting to see if one rancher's stubborn courage and a chained horse's loyalty could outweigh the greed of men who thought everything had a price. They pushed through the reeds until Elias's lungs burned and his arms ached from Jonah's weight. Maren stumbling but refusing to fall, her braid lashing her back like a banner of defiance, and Thunder pressed along the flank, chain dragging but never tangling, as if some hand beyond theirs guided each step. When they reached a small clearing where the ground rose into a knoll, Elias collapsed to one knee, laying Jonah down gently, brushing damp hair from the boy's fevered brow. Maren sank beside him, clutching her stick, eyes wild with exhaustion. Thunder lowered his head, muzzle brushing the satchel Elias still carried, then flicked it aside to nose at the blue ribbon tied under his collar. The gesture snagged Elias's thoughts. He remembered the way the note had mentioned, "He knows the way," and the child's scrawl had carried urgency too sharp to be only about direction. He pulled the ribbon free, held it beside Maren's braid, and saw the truth. The plait under Thunder's collar wasn't only a keepsake, it was half of her own, cut hastily and bound, a marker, a token. Maren gasped when she saw it. "Mama tied that," she whispered, voice breaking. "She said, if ever we were taken, she'd leave one piece with him, one with me, so he could find me again." Elias turned the ribbon over in his fingers, noting the faint smear of red darkened into the fibers, not child's ink at all, but dried blood. "She was hurt," Elias murmured. Maren nodded, eyes spilling. "She tried to keep them from taking Jonah. They struck her. Papa pulled us away. But Mama—" Her voice strangled into silence. Jonah stirred, weakly clutching Elias's hand, whispering Mama again. Elias swallowed hard, fury sparking deep, realization spreading that the braid was no mere token. It was a message, a declaration that the horse had been bound to carry her children's rescue, chained deliberately where a good man might pass. He stuffed the ribbon back into his vest, heart pounding with the weight of a promise he hadn't made but now owned. "Your mother's blood bought this braid," he said, voice low, steady. "I'll not let it mean nothing. She marked Thunder as guardian. That's why he knows the way. He isn't just leading us, he's leading us back to her truth." Thunder stamped, as if sealing the vow. Elias turned to Maren. "Did she say where to go?" The girl shook her head fiercely. "Only that the horse would know, that he carried her secret." Elias's gut knotted. Whatever the horse bore, whatever lay ahead, it was more than coincidence. Then a sound cut the air. Horns, crude but carrying, Silas's men signaling. They had split, circling like wolves, closing in on the knoll. Elias felt the braid against his chest, hot as fire, and realized the secret wasn't only that the horse knew where to lead, it was that Silas would kill to bury it. He lifted Jonah again, pressed the boy to his shoulder. "We move," he growled. Maren clutched his sleeve, eyes blazing. "To where?" Elias looked at Thunder, who had turned his head east again, ears pricked towards the rising sun. "To whatever he remembers," Elias said, "and we'll carry your mama's proof with us." He touched the satchel, then the braid, then gripped his rifle. "Silas will choke on the lies he's spun." The girl nodded, fierceness beyond her years. The stallion pawed the earth, chain rattling like a drumbeat of war. Elias straightened, voice tight. "Then we follow him until this secret's carved in the town square or in Crane's own grave." And with dawn burning their backs and horns closing from every side, they set out again. A widower, 2 frail children, and a chained giant horse carrying the last shred of a mother's love toward a reckoning waiting in plain sight. By midday, Elias's legs trembled from carrying Jonah, his shirt damp with the boy's fever sweat, and Maren stumbled so often she was half dragged by his free hand. But still Thunder pressed them onward, until the trees thinned and the worn ruts of the town road appeared, leading straight to the spire of Dusthaven rising pale against the sky. Relief should have broken through Elias's chest, but instead dread settled, for the road was lined not with friendly faces, but with wagons turned sideways and men on horseback, rifles bristling like a wall. Silas Crane had beaten them there, his banners of greed fluttering in the form of hired guns and fearful townsfolk forced to watch. The sheriff stood near the well with his badge gleaming, but his eyes fixed on Silas as if waiting for orders. "Boone," Silas called, loud enough to turn every head. "Bring the horse and the brats. Lay down that satchel. Do it now, and maybe you'll breathe to see another sunrise." Elias halted, heart hammering, sweat stinging his eyes. Behind him, thunder blew hot breath across his neck, a living furnace, and Maren pressed against his side, her face pale, but her chin set stubborn. Jonah whimpered, stirring weakly, whispering "Mama" into Elias's collar. The crowd murmured, a buzz of pity and fear, and Elias felt the braid inside his vest like a brand searing his heart. He looked across at Silas, saw the smug tilt of his mouth, and realized the man meant not only to seize the horse and the children, but to crush Elias publicly, to burn out any ember of defiance before the town. Elias stepped forward, rifle slung but hands steady. "These children carry their mother's blood in a braid you'd have trampled. Crane," he called, voice cutting the hush, "and in this satchel lies proof of every lie you've fed this town. You can sneer, but you can't hide forever." Silas's face tightened, but he spread his arms theatrically. "You hear that?" he shouted to the crowd. "Boone claims he's savior of babes and widows, but I see a thief holding property not his, 2 runts with no claim, and a beast that already killed 1 man." Gasps rippled, half believing him, half not. Elias gritted his teeth. The father's words echoed. Proof in the satchel, enough to damn him. He knew if he could deliver it to the judge or even the parson, Crane's power might crack. But the rifles bristling left no space to move. Thunder pawed the dirt, chains sparking, and the men flinched back though they hit it with laughter. Maren stepped forward suddenly, her small fists clenched. "We're not property!" she cried, her voice shrill, ragged, but loud enough to turn every face. "He saved us when no one else would, and Mama said this horse would carry us to truth. If you stand with Silas, you stand against her blood." A gasp ran through the women gathered near the well, their eyes darting to the braid frayed at Maren's shoulder. Silas flushed, fury rising. "Silence, brat!" he barked, raising his hand as if to strike. That motion split the crowd. Half recoiled, half murmured, and Elias seized the moment. He lifted the satchel high, voice booming. "In here is your sheriff's debt notes, signed in Crane's hand, proof he sold land from widows to line his pocket. Do you stand with a thief or with a child begging truth?" The crowd roared confusion, voices splitting, and Silas snarled, gesturing for his men. "Take them! Now!" Rifles leveled, hooves stomped, and Elias knew the final clash had come. He shifted Jonah into Maren's arms, chambered around, and pressed his back to Thunder's flank. "Stay with me," he whispered. "One way or another, this ends today." The square erupted in a chaos of boots and dust as Silas's men spurred forward, rifles cracking, bullets whining off hitch rails and the stone well, and Elias shoved Maren and Jonah behind the stallion's massive frame, Thunder rearing high with a scream that rattled windows, his hooves lashing the air like iron hammers to scatter the charge. The crowd shrieked, scattering to porches and alleys, yet dozens stayed frozen, compelled by the spectacle of a giant horse and one gaunt rancher defying a ranch boss who had ruled their pockets and fear for years. Elias dropped to one knee, bracing his rifle, and fired. A gunman spun from the saddle, hitting the ground in a crunch of bones, his mount bolting. Maren cried out, clutching Jonah as the boy sagged in her arms, his eyes fluttering shut, fever pulling him under. And her small voice broke against Elias's back. "He's not breathing right." Elias's heart wrenched, every instinct torn between shooting and saving, but the stallion lunged forward, chain whipping across another rider's chest and sending him gasping into the dust. The sheriff shouted for order, but his voice cracked, drowned beneath Silas's bellow. "Cut Boone down! I want that satchel and that horse!" Elias saw the rifles level again, and in that instant he did what no man of sense would. He rose from cover, holding the satchel high in one hand, his rifle in the other, and roared, "This proves Crane's a liar, a thief, a murderer of widows' land. You want to hide it, Silas? Then kill me before the whole town." The declaration struck like thunder itself. Women gasped, men muttered, and even a few rifles wavered as doubt spread like fire in dry grass. Silas's eyes bulged with fury. "Shoot him!" he shrieked. But before the command could land, thunder charged, slamming into Silas's bay, teeth sinking into its withers, toppling both mounts in a tangle of hooves. Elias spun, grabbed Maren's shoulder, pulled her close. Jonah pressed between them and hissed, "Hold him! Don't let go!" A shot rang, searing hot past Elias's ear, close enough to blister, and he wheeled to return fire, dropping another hand with blood bright against the dust. Jonah's thin breath rasped against his chest, each wheeze like a dying bellows, and Elias knew the boy's life hung by a thread as fine as the ribbon braid inside his vest. "Stay alive, lad," he muttered. "Stay alive and I'll carry you through." The crowd surged then. No longer still. Some women ran forward crying shame on Crane. A blacksmith raised his hammer to block one of Silas's men. A parson grabbed the sheriff's arm and shouted, "You'll answer if you back him." The tide shifted, not by Elias's rifle, but by the weight of townsfolk too long silent, and Silas, scrambling to his feet, face bloodied by his horse's fall, realized the turn. He aimed his pistol straight at Elias, teeth bared, finger tightening, but thunder wheeled with a speed no man expected, his hoof striking Silas's wrist, the pistol flying into the dust. Crane screamed rage and terror, his power slipping like sand. Elias, chest heaving, pressed Jonah into Maren's arms and leveled his rifle again, the barrel steady, though his hands shook with exhaustion. "It ends now, Crane," he said, voice raw but carrying, and the hush that fell was thicker than smoke. Silas spat blood and hate, but for the first time in Dusthaven the people didn't echo him. They waited, eyes on Elias and the chained stallion that stood like judgment by his side. For a breath the square hung silent except for Jonah's rasping breaths and the chain's soft jangle where thunder pawed. Then the murmur of the crowd swelled into voices, low at first, then louder, angry, breaking into shouts that rolled like thunder against the walls of Dusthaven. "We've had enough!" a woman cried, her apron stained with flour, pointing straight at Silas. "You've taken bread from our mouths for years!" Another man, gray-bearded with a smith's hammer still in his hand, bellowed, "My brother lost his ranch to your notes, Crane!" The sheriff hesitated, badge glinting in the morning light, torn between power and the people now rising. Elias seized the moment, pulling the satchel from under his arm, shaking it so papers fluttered like doves. "This holds proof," he shouted. "Deeds forged by Crane. Debts twisted into chains heavier than any iron on that horse. Let the judge read it. Let the parson hold it. Truth belongs to the town, not one man's pocket." The parson stepped forward, trembling but resolute, reaching for the satchel. Silas lurched toward them, face swollen, voice breaking with panic. "Don't touch it! Lies, all lies! Boone forges as easy as he shoots!" He shoved at the parson, but thunder reared, slamming hooves down inches from his boots, sending him stumbling back with a cry. Elias pressed the satchel into the parson's chest, gripping his arm. "Guard it with your life. The town deserves to see." The parson nodded, clutching it close, already peeling open the flap. Murmurs spread as the first pages were held aloft, signatures familiar to many eyes, land sold cheap to Crane, debts crossed with names of the dead. Gasps turned to outrage. "My father's!" one voice cried. "He stole our grazing land." "My son's wages!" another shouted. The sheriff sagged, shoulders bowing as the crowd's fury turned like a tide. Elias turned, seizing Marin's hand where she knelt, clutching Jonah. "Hold on, girl. We're breaking it." Jonah moaned, fevered, and Elias's heart clenched. Time was bleeding from the boy like water through sand. Silas, desperate, drew a hidden knife, lunging toward Elias, spitting, "If I can't have the land, I'll have your blood." Elias twisted aside, grappling his wrist, the blade flashing between them, but thunder lunged again, shoulder slamming Crane sideways. The knife clattered, swallowed by dust. A dozen townsfolk surged, grabbing Silas, wrenching his arms back, dragging him towards the stocks by the well. The sheriff, seeing his rein broken, finally barked, "Hold him! By law he answers." Elias staggered, chest heaving, sweat and dust streaking his face. He crouched beside Marin and Jonah, brushing the boy's damp hair back. "Stay with me, son. Just a little longer." Marin's eyes burned with tears, her grip fierce on her brother's thin hand. "You saved us," she whispered. Elias shook his head. "Your mama saved you. She trusted the horse, and the horse led me here. I only walked the path she carved." The parson raised the papers high, his voice ringing over the tumult. "This town has lived in lies, but lies are done. Justice belongs to truth, and truth is here." The square roared, a sound of chains breaking though no iron fell, and Silas's curses were drowned beneath it. Elias rose, lifting Jonah gently. And thunder pressed his nose to the boy's shoulder, as if lending breath. Elias looked across the faces of Dusthaven, once cowed, now fierce, and felt a strange tremor of hope. For the first time in years, the town no longer bent to one man's will. It bent toward justice, carried by the courage of a child's hand and a horse that refused to bow. The square did not empty after Silas was dragged to the stocks, his curses sputtering into hoarse silence, for the people of Dusthaven lingered to watch what would come of the children and the rancher who had defied a tyrant. Elias stood at the well's edge, Jonah cradled in his arms, the boy's fever burning like a brand, his breath's shallow gasps that made the crowd hold theirs in uneasy rhythm. Marin stood tight against Elias's side, her braid falling loose, the blue ribbon frayed and trembling in the dawn light. The parson came, clutching both satchel and scriptures, and with him the town's old healer, a woman stooped but sharp-eyed, who touched Jonah's brow and clucked. "He's half in the grave already, but not gone yet. Bring him inside." Elias followed her into the meeting hall, Marin at his side. Thunder waiting at the door with a patience that seemed almost human, his dark eye unblinking, the chain dragging softly like an echo of every burden carried. The healer worked with poultices and water, but Jonah's breathing remained thin. Elias sat at his side, gripping the boy's frail hand, whispering, "You're safe now, lad. Safe," though his own heart doubted. Marin pulled the braid from her hair, the last shred of ribbon clinging, and pressed it against her brother's chest. "Mama said it would keep us together," she whispered fiercely. "Don't leave me, Jonah, don't you dare." Hours passed. The town gathered in the hall. Papers from the satchel spread for all to see. Deeds forged, debts faked, signatures twisted. Crane's power turned to ash in every eye. At last the judge, summoned by the parson, declared Crane guilty before the people, and the sheriff, now meek, could only nod. But Elias heard little, for he bent only to Jonah, praying silent. Then thunder stomped once at the door, and Elias looked up to see the stallion staring in, ears forward, as if waiting. Marin tugged Elias's sleeve. "Let him near." The healer frowned, but Elias nodded, lifting Jonah's frail body to the threshold. Thunder lowered his vast head, breathing over the boy, warm air ruffling the thin blanket. Jonah stirred, eyelids fluttering, and for the first time in days his breath drew deeper. The crowd gasped, women covering mouths, and Marin sobbed with joy, clutching her brother as his lips formed the word, "Mama," not as a plea, but as a memory. The healer smiled, tears streaking her lined face. Sometimes love carries where medicine cannot. Elias set Jonah gently down, heart lifting with a weightless ache. Outside, the sun had risen high, gilding Thunder's black hide into bronze, and Elias knew the braid's meaning was fulfilled. The horse had carried not only children but truth itself, chained until courage cut it free. The townsfolk pressed around, some offering food, others blankets, and Marin stood on a bench, voice strong despite weariness. "Mama trusted him," she said, pointing to Elias. "And Mama was right." The parson added his voice. "A man who carried a child's plea against greed has earned a family larger than blood." Elias bowed his head, humbled, but Marin slipped her small hand into his, and Jonah's weak fingers clutched the other. In that circle of frailty, he felt something settle deep, a vow not spoken, but binding. Thunder tossed his head, chain clinking, then stilled, waiting. Elias led the children out into sunlight, the square alive with faces no longer bowed, and together they stood where the braid, the note, and the stallion's loyalty had led them, not just to survival, but to redemption carved clear before heaven and men. And as Jonah leaned against his chest and Marin held his hand tight, Elias whispered, "You're mine now, as much as I am yours," a promise carried on dust and sun, with a giant horse standing like an altar behind them, free at last. Please like, share, and subscribe to support more true-hearted stories on Stories Left Behind. If you had found that chained horse with a note tied to its neck, would you have followed him into the woods too?